Laughter echoed through the mahogany-paneled lawyer's office when 28-year-old Clara inherited nothing but a collapsed century-old Nevada silver mine. Her family called her a fool for not selling the worthless dirt. But 3 years later, the laughing stopped dead when her pickaxe struck something that wasn't rock. It was a solid gold door. The reading of a will is supposed to be a solemn affair, but in the plush high-rise Seattle office of Hughes and Associates, it felt more like a roast, and Clara Caldwell was the main course. Her grandfather, Henry Caldwell, had been a legendary eccentric, a man who made a fortune in maritime shipping only to lose half of it, chasing bizarre historical artifacts and investing in ghost towns. When he passed away at 89, his remaining estate was divided among his 3 surviving descendants. Clara sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded over her faded denim jacket, listening as the lawyer, a stiff man named Alexander Hughes, handed out the golden tickets. To her older half-brother, Richard, went the $1.2 million liquid portfolio. Richard smirked, leaning back in his tailored Italian suit. To their cousin Evelyn went the sprawling, 3-story real estate property in Queen Anne. Then came Clara. And to my youngest granddaughter, Clara, Hughes read, adjusting his glasses, a hint of pity bleeding into his professional tone. I leave the entirety of deed number 404-B, the Whispering Pines property located in Story County, Nevada, along with all mineral water and subterranean rights attached. Richard let out a sharp, cruel bark of laughter. A hole in the ground. He left you a literal hole in the ground. Good Lord, Clara, at least you won't have to pay for a grave. Evelyn giggled behind her manicured hand. Isn't that the old silver mine that went bust in 1912? I think Grandpa bought it for taxes in the 90s, just so he could say he owned a mountain. Clara stared at the thick, yellowed envelope Hughes pushed across the polished oak table. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just reached out and took it. Inside wasn't just a deed. There was a small, leather-bound notebook. Her grandfather's handwriting covered the first page. They stopped digging too soon. Clara, the map is wrong. The fault line lied. Find the blind wall. Before Clara even made it to the elevator, her phone buzzed. It was an email from a man named Gregory Harrison, CEO of Harrison Development Corp. The message was incredibly brief and aggressively condescending. He was offering her $15,000 for the 40 acres of Nevada wasteland. He claimed he wanted it for a municipal landfill project. Take it, Richard sneered, stepping into the elevator beside her. 15 grand pays off your student loans, Clara. You work at a coffee shop. You don't know the first thing about real estate, let alone a condemned mine in the middle of nowhere. I'm not selling, Richard, Clara said quietly. Don't be a stubborn idiot. It's a hazardous waste site. The Bureau of Land Management will fine you into oblivion if someone trips and falls on that dirt. It's mine, and I'm keeping it. 2 weeks later, Clara packed her 2014 Honda Civic with every piece of clothing she owned, withdrew her life savings of $22,000, and drove down the 5 straight into the punishing heart of the Nevada desert. Whispering Pines was worse than Richard had described. It wasn't a mountain. It was a scar. Located 10 miles outside of Virginia City, the property consisted of 40 acres of dead scrub brush, blistering sun, and a massive, rotting wooden headframe that stood over a pitch-black vertical shaft. The ground was littered with rusted nails, oxidized tin cans, and the bleached bones of coyotes. Clara bought a beat-up 1978 Airstream trailer for $3,000 and parked it near the entrance. She had no running water, relying on plastic jugs she filled at a gas station 2 towns over. Her only ally was a grizzled 70-year-old retired surveyor named Alexander Pendleton. Alexander had owed her grandfather his life after Henry bailed him out of a massive gambling debt in the late 80s. "You're out of your mind, kid," Alexander said on the first day, spitting chewing tobacco into the dust as he looked at the crumbling mine entrance. "This is a widowmaker. The timber in there is rotten. The air is toxic. And even if you get down there, it's just rhyolite and quartz. The silver dried up before the Titanic sank." "Grandpa said they missed the secondary vein," Clara argued, holding up the leather diary. He tracked the seismic data in the 80s. "There's an anomaly at the 400-foot level. An eastern adit that isn't on the county maps." Alexander sighed, wiping sweat from his deeply lined forehead. "All right, but I'm telling you right now, 20 grand isn't going to buy you a mining empire. It's going to buy you a lot of broken drill bits and a bruised ego." For the next 8 months, Clara lived in a state of perpetual agony. She spent $10,000 securing the permits passing the MSHA Mine Safety and Health Administration inspections and renting a refurbished Atlas Copco jackleg drill and an old winch system. She hired 2 local brothers, Dave and Tommy, paying them daily in cash to help her and Alexander replace the rotting shoring timbers in the main shaft. It was brutal backbreaking work. Clara's hands, once soft from pouring lattes, became calloused and cracked, permanently stained with grey rock dust. She lost 15 pounds. Her days were spent breathing in the smell of cordite damp earth and diesel exhaust. And the town noticed. Virginia City was a place that thrived on gossip, and Clara Caldwell was the best joke they'd had in years. The local paper, the Story County Tribune, published a mocking editorial calling her operation Caldwell's Folly. Tourists driving past the property would occasionally stop their cars just to point and laugh at the 20-something city girl covered in mud trying to wrestle a pneumatic drill through solid bedrock. Gregory Harrison didn't just laugh, he escalated. Harrison wanted the land, and Clara's refusal to sell had bruised his ego. He began sending code enforcement officers to her property on anonymous tips. They hit her with fines for noise ordinances, improper waste disposal, and zoning infractions. Every time Clara made a foot of progress, Harrison's lawyers found a way to bleed her of another $500. By the end of her first year, Clara had hit the 300-foot mark, but her bank account had hit 0. 18 months into the dig, the brutal Nevada winter had set in, freezing the metal tools and turning the ground outside into concrete. Clara was surviving on instant ramen and black coffee. Dave and Tommy had quit 3 weeks prior when their Friday paychecks bounced. It was just Clara and Alexander left working by the dim yellow light of halogen work lamps, freezing in the damp belly of the earth. Then the ultimate betrayal arrived, in the form of a certified letter. Clara was sitting in her Airstream wrapped in 2 sleeping bags when a sheriff's deputy knocked on her door to serve the papers. She tore open the envelope, her frozen fingers clumsy. It was a notice of foreclosure. To fund the excavation and pay the mounting legal fines from Harrison's harassment, Clara had taken out a high-interest personal loan of $35,000 from a local credit union, using the property as collateral. But the paperwork in her hands wasn't from the bank. The debt had been bought. She stared at the name at the bottom of the page, Richard Caldwell. Her brother had bought her debt. Her phone buzzed a moment later. It was a text from Richard. "Harrison offered me $50,000 for the lien on the property. I'm taking it on Friday. You have 72 hours to pack up your little Airstream and go back to Seattle. I told you, Clara. You're a joke. Time to wake up." Clara dropped the phone. The air in the trailer felt too thin to breathe. Richard wasn't just laughing at her. He had actively conspired with Gregory Harrison to steal her grandfather's land. They were going to bulldoze the mine, pave over it, and turn it into a cheap industrial dumping ground. "Alexander!" Clara screamed, bursting out of the trailer into the freezing Nevada night. She ran to the small generator shed where the old man was trying to patch a frayed wire. Alexander, fire up the winch. We're going down. Clara, it's midnight. It's 10 degrees out here, and the generator is choking on bad diesel. We have 72 hours before the sheriff locks us out forever. She yelled, tears of pure, unadulterated rage cutting tracks through the soot on her cheeks. My brother sold me out to Harrison. If we don't find the Eastern Adit by Friday, I lose everything. Alexander looked at her, seeing the terrifying desperation in her eyes. He didn't argue. He just grabbed his hard hat. Get the dynamite. All of it. They descended to the 400-foot level in the rickety steel cage, the metal groaning in protest. This deep, the cold vanished, replaced by a suffocating stale warmth. The walls here were different. According to the geological surveys Harrison had cited to the public, this was solid granite. A dead end. But Grandpa Henry's diary had insisted there was a blind fault, a geological illusion hiding a natural cavern. With her last $300, Clara had secretly rented a state-of-the-art, ground-penetrating radar GPR unit. It was heavy awkward and designed for professional geology teams, not two desperate people in a crumbling mine. For 12 straight hours they scanned the eastern rock face. Nothing. Just solid, unforgiving rock. Clara's arms ached so badly she could barely lift the sensor. Her vision blurred. Defeat was a heavy, suffocating blanket settling over her shoulders. Richard was right. Harrison was right. She was a fool. Clara. Alexander croaked, his voice raw from the dust. He was staring at the small LCD screen of the radar monitor. Bring the sensor back. Down and to the left, near the floor. Clara dropped to her knees, sweeping the heavy device over the lower quadrant of the eastern wall. The screen beeped. A sharp, jagged red line spiked on the display. Then the screen went entirely black, save for a massive blue void perfectly centered in the data feed. Alexander took off his glasses, his hands trembling. That's impossible. Is it a vein? Clara gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. No, Alexander whispered. A vein is jagged. It snakes through the rock. Clara, look at the edges of this void on the screen. They're perfectly straight. Nature doesn't make straight lines. There is a massive hollow space behind this rock, and it has right angles. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the pneumatic drill and began boring holes into the rock face in a star pattern. The noise was deafening, shaking dust from the timber shoring above them. They only had 10 sticks of commercial dynamite left. It was a dangerous gamble. Too much explosive, and they would bring the entire mountain down on their heads, burying them alive. Too little, and they wouldn't breach the rock before the sheriff arrived on Friday morning. Set the charges, Clara ordered, her voice eerily calm. Alexander rigged the blasting caps, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. They retreated 50 yards down the tunnel, hiding behind an old ore cart. Fire in the hole! Alexander yelled. He plunged the detonator. The explosion was catastrophic. The shockwave picked Clara off her feet and threw her hard into the dirt. A deafening roar tore through the tunnel, followed by a terrifying, prolonged sound of groaning earth. Rocks rained down from the ceiling. For a terrifying minute, Clara thought she had killed them both. The dust was so thick, it was like choking on flour. She coughed violently, grabbing her heavy maglite. Alexander, are you okay? I'm alive, the old man wheezed, shining his own light through the dense cloud. Let's see what you bought with your life savings, kid. They scrambled over the freshly blasted rubble, their boots slipping on the jagged scree. As the dust slowly began to settle, Clara shined her flashlight at the breached wall. She froze. The breath completely vanished from her lungs. The dynamite hadn't just blasted a hole in the rock. It had peeled away a layer of natural stone to reveal what had been hidden beneath it, for God only knew how long. It wasn't a silver vein. It wasn't natural rock. Rising from the rubble was a perfectly smooth, man-made wall of massive interlocking stone blocks. It looked like ancient masonry, resembling the precision of Incan or Egyptian architecture, but buried 400 feet beneath the Nevada desert. But that wasn't what made Clara drop her flashlight. Between the massive stone blocks, acting as mortar holding the ancient structure together, were thick, gleaming seams of a strange metal. Clara stepped forward in a trance, pulling off her heavy leather glove. She reached out and dragged her bare fingers across the metal seam. It was soft, and in the beam of the fallen flashlight, it burned with a brilliant, unmistakable yellow luster. It was pure, unrefined gold. Not a flake, not a nugget. Hundreds of pounds of it used simply as paste to hold the stones together. "Alexander," Clara whispered, her voice trembling so hard she could barely form the words. Through the massive, jagged hole, the dynamite had ripped through the center of the masonry wall. A strange, cool draft was blowing outward. Clara grabbed a crowbar, wedging it against a loose chunk of the stone, and with a feral scream of exertion, she pulled. The block gave way, crashing to the floor and widening the gap. Clara stepped through the threshold, Alexander right behind her. As they raised their flashlights to illuminate the darkness beyond, the beams of light bounced off thousands of reflective surfaces, creating a blinding, kaleidoscopic glow. Clara fell to her knees. Richard had laughed at her. Harrison had tried to destroy her. But as she stared out into the impossible, shimmering, subterranean expanse, Clara Caldwell realized she hadn't just found a mine. She had found a city. The beams of their flashlights trembled as they swept across a site that defied every law of modern geology and history. It was not a natural cavern. It was a sprawling subterranean plaza, easily the size of 3 football fields, carved directly into the bedrock. Massive, geometrically perfect pillars of polished black basalt stretched upward, supporting a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into the shadows. But it was the walls that stole Clara's breath. They were lined with towering, step-like structures resembling ancient ziggurats, all constructed from the same colossal stone blocks, and binding every single stone together was that blinding, unmistakable yellow metal. "Who built this?" Clara whispered, her voice echoing into the vast emptiness. "Alexander. This predates the Native American tribes in this region. This predates everything we know about North America." Alexander didn't answer. He was walking like a man in a trance toward the center of the plaza. As they moved deeper into the dead city, their boots kicking up dust that hadn't been disturbed in centuries, the true nature of the space began to reveal itself. This wasn't just an ancient ruin. It was a tomb that had been violently interrupted by modern men. Littered across the floor were the remains of 19th century mining equipment. Rusted pickaxes with decaying wooden handles, overturned iron ore carts, and a massive steam-powered winch that had completely seized with rust. Clara knelt beside a heavy iron-bound wooden crate that had split open, spilling its contents onto the stone floor. She picked up a heavy, soot-stained canvas bag. Inside were dozens of raw, unrefined gold ingots, but it was the stamp on the decaying crate that made Alexander's face go pale. "Property of the Bank of California, 1874. Alexander read aloud, his voice cracking. He looked up at Clara, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "Clara, do you know your Nevada history? Do you know who ran the Comstock lode in the 1870s? William Sharon and William Ralston," Clara said, piecing it together from her grandfather's obsessive historical notes. "The bank ring tycoons. They monopolized the silver. They monopolized the world's wealth," Alexander corrected, pointing his flashlight toward a massive, riveted iron bulkhead door that had been built directly into one of the ancient archways, sealing off a deeper section of the city. In 1874, the United States was entirely dependent on the gold standard. If word got out that William Sharon had discovered an ancient underground metropolis made literally of thousands of tons of pure gold, what do you think would have happened? Clara's eyes widened. It would have tanked the global economy. Gold would have become as cheap and common as iron. Their entire banking empire would have collapsed overnight. Exactly, Alexander breathed. They didn't mine it. They couldn't. It was too much. They quietly murdered or paid off the miners who found it, blasted the upper tunnels, mapped a fake fault line, and buried the greatest archaeological discovery in human history to protect their stock portfolios. Clara looked around the shimmering cavern. Her grandfather had known. Henry Caldwell hadn't been a crazy eccentric, buying up worthless dirt. He had spent decades tracking the suppressed financial anomalies and geological cover-ups of the 1800s. He had found the back door to the tycoon's greatest secret. "Alexander," Clara said, her voice suddenly hardening into steel. She looked at her digital watch. It was 3 a.m. on Thursday. She had exactly 27 hours before Richard and Harrison arrived with the sheriff to steal her grandfather's legacy. "Help me load the truck. We aren't just saving the mine. We're going to break them." For the next 6 hours, running entirely on adrenaline, Clara and Alexander hauled over 200 pounds of the loose 1874 stamped gold ingots up the creaking winch cage to the surface. It was a fraction of a percent of what lay below, but it was enough to wage war. By noon, Clara's battered Honda Civic was tearing down the highway toward Reno, the trunk sagging heavily under the weight of the bullion. She bypassed the local pawn shops and standard assayers. Instead, Clara drove straight to the heavily fortified glass-fronted offices of the Benton and Hayes Sovereign Wealth Depository, an elite private banking and assay firm that handled international mining conglomerates. When the receptionist tried to turn away, the dust-covered, exhausted woman in work boots, Clara simply unzipped a heavy canvas duffel bag and dropped a 10-pound ancient gold ingot onto the marble front desk. The massive thud cracked the glass counter. "I need your chief assayer," Clara said coldly. "Now." Within 20 minutes, Clara was sitting in a secure, steel-walled boardroom with David Benton himself. The older man was staring through a jeweler's loupe at the gold, visibly sweating. "The purity is staggering," Benton stammered, wiping his brow. "And the stamps, this is Comstock-era Bank of California. Historians claim these molds were destroyed in a fire in 1875. Miss Caldwell, where on earth did you get this?" "That is my proprietary information," Clara replied, smoothly channeling every ounce of her grandfather's ruthless business acumen. "Here is what I need, Mr. Benton. I need a certified appraisal of the 200 pounds of bullion I brought today. I need an immediate liquid line of credit for $3 million wired into my primary account. And I need your top legal team on retainer by 5 o'clock today." Benton looked at the gold, then back at Clara. "And if I provide this, then Benton and Hayes will be the exclusive financial broker for the Whispering Pines site," Clara said. "And I can assure you, Mr. Benton, what I brought in my trunk today is just the spare change I found on the floor." Friday morning broke over the Nevada desert with a bitterly cold, biting wind. At exactly 7 a.m., a sleek black Mercedes G-Wagon crunched down the dirt access road toward the Whispering Pines mine. Behind it followed a white Story County Sheriff's cruiser. Gregory Harrison stepped out of the Mercedes, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke camel-hair overcoat. He looked around the desolate, junk-strewn property with a look of supreme disgust. Richard stepped out of the passenger side, shivering in the cold, holding a leather briefcase containing the foreclosure documents. I can't wait to bulldoze that pathetic airstream. Harrison sneered, lighting a thick cigar. Did you bring the eviction notices? Right here, Richard smiled. Let's get this over with. The idiot is probably crying inside. Sheriff Miller, a sturdy man who looked like he hated being dragged into corporate disputes, unbuckled his radio and walked toward the trailer. Miss Caldwell, this is the sheriff's department. I need you to step outside, please. The door to the airstream swung open. Clara stepped out, but she wasn't crying. She wasn't wearing her soot-stained denim jacket. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored black wool trench coat, holding a steaming mug of coffee. She looked well-rested, immaculate, and utterly terrifying. Good morning, Sheriff. Clara smiled warmly. What can I do for you? Cut the act. Clara. Richard snapped, marching forward. You defaulted on the lien. I own the debt. Harrison owns the land. You have 30 minutes to get your things and get off my property. Your property? Clara raised an eyebrow. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. That's strange, Richard, because at exactly 6:01 a.m. this morning, my bank wired $42,500 to the county clerk, paying off the loan, the accrued interest, and the early termination penalty in full. The lien is dissolved. Richard froze. Harrison stopped, puffing his cigar. That's impossible. Richard stammered, his face draining of color. You don't have 40 grand. You're completely broke. Sheriff, she's lying. Sheriff Miller checked his radio, muttered a few codes to dispatch, and waited. A moment later, his radio crackled, confirming Sheriff. The Caldwell lien at Whispering Pines was discharged this morning. Title is free and clear under Clara Caldwell. Harrison's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He threw his cigar into the dirt. Where did you get the money, you little brat? Did you find some stupid venture capitalist to back a dead mine? It doesn't matter. I have a court order from the EPA. This site is structurally condemned. If you don't sell to me, I'll have the feds lock you in litigation until you're 50. You're right, Mr. Harrison. The federal government is very involved, Clara said, taking a slow sip of her coffee. Right on cue, 3 heavy-duty black SUVs with federal government plates turned off the highway and came roaring down the dirt road, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. They slammed to a halt behind Harrison's Mercedes. 6 men and women in tactical windbreakers stepped out. The letters on their backs read, Department of Interior, Antiquities Division. Behind them, 2 massive flatbed trucks, carrying heavy modular steel fencing and high-tech security checkpoints, began to roll onto the property. What the hell is this? Harrison yelled, stepping back. This, Clara said, stepping off the porch of her Airstream, is the United States government stepping in to protect a newly designated Class 1 Federal Archaeological Heritage Site. Clara walked slowly toward her brother and the corrupt developer, savoring every single step. You see, Richard, she said smoothly, Grandpa Henry didn't leave me a hole in the ground. He left me the largest unbroken reserve of 19th century refined bullion and ancient unclassified subterranean architecture on the North American continent. The Smithsonian is flying out a team of archaeologists tonight. Benton and Hayes Banking just underwrote my mining rights for an initial valuation of $3 billion. Richard's briefcase slipped from his hand, hitting the dirt with a pathetic thud. His jaw unhinged. He looked like he was going to vomit. $3 billion. Richard choked out, his knees visibly shaking. Harrison's arrogance entirely evaporated. Clara, wait, he said, his voice suddenly adopting a sickeningly desperate, placating tone. Listen, we got off on the wrong foot. You need developers. You need infrastructure to manage a site this big. Harrison Corp can build the access roads. Harrison Corp is currently under investigation, Clara interrupted, flashing a razor-sharp smile. When I registered the site, I also handed my lawyers every single piece of correspondence you sent me, proving you attempted to artificially condemn an asset of vital national historic interest to commit real estate fraud. The FBI field office in Las Vegas is executing a warrant on your corporate servers right now." Harrison turned ashen. He looked at the federal agents fanning out across the property, then looked at his Mercedes, as if contemplating making a run for it. Clara turned to her brother, who was staring at her with wide, wet, pleading eyes. "Clara, please," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm your brother. We're blood. Grandpa would have wanted us to share this. I can help you manage the estate." Clara reached into her pocket. She pulled out a single tarnished silver dime she had found in the dirt on her very first day. She tossed it through the air. It hit Richard squarely in the chest and fell into the dust at his feet. "There's your inheritance, Richard," Clara said, turning her back on him and walking back toward the mine entrance, where Alexander was waiting with a triumphant grin. "Don't let the gate hit you on the way out." What started as a cruel family joke turned into the greatest archaeological and financial discovery of the century. Clara's unwavering belief in her grandfather's diary proved that sometimes the biggest treasures are hidden right behind the walls of our own doubts. Have you ever trusted your gut when everyone else told you you were totally crazy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this real-life treasure hunt, smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more.